On behalf of Nyarungas and Gyari family, I would like to welcome Kungu Tsering, representative of CTA North America, who is on his way, Dorje Satan, member of Tibetan Parliament, and all friends and family here today. Kasur Tenzing Tethongla is our first speaker. He is a lifelong friend of Lodi Gyari Rinpoche, and his family has had connection with Nyarung people for 3 generations. Today we are fortunate to have many wonderful speakers who have shared remarkable life experiences with Lodi Gyari Rinpoche. Please welcome our first speaker, Kasur Tenzing Tethong.
당고 대표가 직진이 주초치 가바지 오이길에 다리대 캠프 넘버 체 아니 쇼도카게 돼 쇼로만 고치 페이지에 rumbuchingi shibishi kuyushabdan pe-toba-da an-daga nang-shin-de nyarong-a-tsu-che an-mik-se rumbuchingi gomji loji tomi-la-da an-de manguchigi tari-de shabdan-de zom-toba-da dinde kogab-shi-nam-de tochi-che-su-ya-yin rumbuchingi gozi-gor-da tsangmai-lu-gyu shibda-san-yo-re ani mutu-ni rumbuchingi da pyo-jibe-to-al kule-kari-gyom-ba-di rinpe tanto ser jugu resambudu ta shuya mango chiwarde ta tari ringu shuya kaya marde nyingdu karu shuya warasana gyariram chinga kuzi chik ringa Mimanda and Yarum Shuna Pet Mijre in the Insa. He Sujiginamian Jay or Maris Mudu. Could this be any Taride Chige Condre that in the Moyes Inginale 16 years Labrachismutu, and then Rob's the English to you and the Shuchurch. First of all, I'll say a few words in English. I want to begin by thanking Kembos and other members of the Sangha who are here, along with Gyari brother, Dorje Thongme, and people from the Nyarong area of Tibet. Gyari from his hometown for organizing this prayer for Rinpoche and for giving us an opportunity to be here today. Gyari Rinpoche believed in the cause of Tibet. He believed that a great wrong had been done and that Tibet needed to be restored to its rightful place in the world. He believed that it could be accomplished, and from his early teen years, he dedicated himself to the cause. Starting as a young journalist and a junior officer in the exiled government, later to be elected Speaker of the Parliament, followed by appointments as Minister in the Kashak and as His Holiness the Dalai Lama's Special Representative in Washington, D.C. I first met Rinpoche in 1962 when we were both in school in Darjeeling. Rinpoche did not come back the following year. Instead, he started working at the Tibetan Freedom Press. But he visited us occasionally, always talking about Tibet. As many of you know, we worked together on several initiatives, but we were never in the same room at the same time, so to speak. When he was in Delhi, I was in Dharamsala, and when he was in Dharamsala, I was in New York, and when I was in Dharamsala again, he was in Washington, D.C. But we worked collaboratively in many ways, from calling forth the first Tibetan Youth Conference, which gave birth to the Tibetan Youth Congress, to harnessing global support for Tibet with the establishment of the International Campaign for Tibet. What I remember most vividly is how Rinpoche went about trying to engage prominent Indians, including members of the parliament such as MC Chagla, to take a fresh look at Tibet. We ran around Delhi on scooters with only the rare public phone to set up these meetings. This was in the late 1960s, and some 20 years later, we were doing it again in Washington, D.C., trying to convince skeptical congressmen, the likes of Stephen Solars in the House, who needed to know what was at stake for him and his Brooklyn district. How we did with Mr. Chagla or Congressman Solars are stories yet to be told. When Rinpoche became a Kalun, he played a critical role in formulating the Tibetan government's renewed push to internationalize the Tibetan issue in the 1980s, assisting His Holiness the Dalai Lama with his 5-point peace plan speech, and leading the grassroots campaign for the nomination of His Holiness for the Nobel Peace Prize. And once in Washington, the Tibet Policy Act and the Congressional Gold Medal for His Holiness followed. And of course, as Special Envoy, he succeeded in bringing the Chinese to the table, a culmination of his special talents and his dedication to the cause of Tibet. There is much more that can be said of Rinpoche's life and his contribution to Tibet, his service to the people of Tibet and to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And perhaps more will be said because apart from those who know him well and have worked closely with him, the full extent of his dedication, hard work, and his special talents are yet to be fully appreciated. I will remember Rinpoche as a friend and as a colleague, a Tibetan who served the people and nation of Tibet, and a remarkable public servant who served the Tibetan government in exile and His Holiness the Dalai Lama with high distinction. Thank you.
Keith Pet's former congressional staff.
Good afternoon. I want to thank the Tibetan community and the Narong community and the Gyari family for providing this opportunity for honor and celebrate a dear friend and a compassionate warrior. DC is a town where, politicians oftentimes protest that, money doesn't drive decisions and power, but I think we all know that that's the truth. But I think one of the things I really appreciated about Lodi is he was able to come to this city, which spits out a lot of people, and basically got a lot of work done just through leadership, pressing us all to do better. And just developing deep friendships over time. That was really, what he brought to this community, not only for Tibetans, but I think for just the tone and tenor in DC in general. For me, working with him, over 30 years, could never quite figure him out when we were being devious and tricky and kind of creative about things. He was a big brother, and sometimes when you were losing hope in some initiative you were pushing, he was the father you always wanted to have. So he gave honest advice, sometimes a little cutting, but always with your best interest at heart. He really dedicated his life to this cause, and often it, great personal loss to himself personally and to his family. He literally came here, uprooted his entire family, and made a commitment to build international campaign for Tibet into a world-class organization. Some of us that were involved with that very early on, there was a lot of heart in that effort, and we gave it all, but it really was Lodi that built it into a really professional and respected organization. And one of my greatest appreciations about Lodi is he could work with anybody, and regardless of your political leanings or religious leanings, he found a way for you to not only work and support the Tibetan cause. He also helped you grow as an individual. I personally found myself oftentimes working on something where I had no clue what I was doing, and it was something that Lodi had cooked up, and it was really not until later that you realize the wisdom of his ways. And he was also so dedicated to Tibet, but he also pressed very much for human rights. I think there's a lot of people in the Mongol and Uyghur communities that owe him a tremendous debt as well. He didn't just build a family, he really made you part of his family. And I think that we all need to take a lesson from that. I also think something unique about him is he was most of us, when we have attention and power, we find it very difficult to give that up. And, there was a point in his efforts with the wisdom of His Holiness as well that, was very much involved in supporting democratic initiatives within the Tibetan government in exile. And Lodi wholeheartedly believed in that. And, I think, the Tibetan government exile has embraced democracy. I think that, definitely, picking up some of what was learned here in Washington, but, also picked up some of the politics that go on with D.C. And, Lodi suffered a bit from that at times to time. And I think rather than become a distraction, he made a decision to step away and support the democratic process and find other ways to contribute and find ways for the rest of us to contribute as well. And I just want to thank Lodi and thank all of you for bringing me into your family. And just a personal story. Lodi was he's somebody that could have, he was so well known within D.C. and internationally, he could have stepped away from Tibet at any point in time and been a very, wealthy and influential individual. But he stuck with Tibet, he stuck with human rights, and he found time to be human as well. And I just want to, I have a son that's going to turn 17 years old in a few days, and there was a point where he was born with a major heart defect and was not expected to live. And the night before, we thought we were going to be saying goodbye to him. Lodi came, kicked us all out of the hospital room, spent several hours in the hotel room with my son doing the medicine Buddha. I think just creating a calm space. And of course he came out later and told my wife Graham was going to be okay. And she said, "Lodi, you're Buddhist. What the hell does that mean?" So, but he made it through it. And I think just on a personal level, all of us have stories like that from Lodi. As busy as he could be, as important as he was, he made time on a very personal level for all of us. And I just need to say, thank you, old friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith, for joining us all the way from California. Next, we have Jang Nurbu, friend of Rinpoche and Gyari family.
Pökelcik şu sam çene de çige mangu peyesa. De inji national and pamang ta Washington şudu pabay kanga inji ya kingi yosangye. Dux inji na chi shushen ya merasam ye. My name is Jameng Nobu, and I was a very, very old friend of Gyari Rinpoche. You all know him essentially after he came here to Washington and worked with the ICT and on negotiations with China, even Tibetans here. But I knew him much before that. Knew him from the 60s when he was the first editor of the first English language magazine that the Tibetans published in exile. It was called The Voice of Tibet. And Rinpoche was he was a very young man and needed advice. And he came to my father because my father was an Indian national, although he was Tibetan. So he could edit. In those days in India, you had a law that did not allow foreigners to own newspapers in India. So he had to always deal with my father, and that's how I got to know him. And afterwards, when I left home and I joined the Mustang resistance and with the CIA and everything, that's when Rinpoche's career, which you don't know very much about. Also, he was involved in intelligence work in the Tibetan government. Primarily, he was director of what you call TORA, Tibetan Office of Research and Analysis. And I was his China specialist. Basically, in those days, what it meant, I had the biggest library on China. That's about it. There are very few people like we have just now coming from Tibet, speaking Chinese. In those days in Dharamsala, there was really no expertise at all. So essentially, Gyari Rinpoche made me his head of China desk, which is literally just one desk, and my books behind it. And I had to write all the reports in those days for like the Cultural Revolution, what was happening. The world really didn't know it. So even though I was a very untutored young man, essentially I had as much information on what was happening inside Tibet and in China as the rest of the world did. So that was Rinpoche's work, and he was really good at it. He was a very good hustler. He managed to get us funds, all the magazines and journals, information that we required from Hong Kong. He managed to get it for me. And then later, he made the first deal after the Americans pulled out of supporting Tibet, pulled out of supporting the Tibetan resistance. Rinpoche, at that time, he was a secretary of what the Tibetans called the Parliamentary Group for Tibet. This was way before America took any interest, in the diplomatic world with Tibet. So this was with Indians, to get Indian parliamentary members to support Tibetans. And Rinpoche was doing a lot of this work, and he used to go to the diplomatic parties. And we were desperately trying to get money from Western governments. The Americans just pulled out after Richard Nixon went to China. So all we got, the Russians, we even tried the Russians, because Russians at that time had problems with China. Nothing worked out. Rinpoche, he met the French military attaché at a cocktail party. And finally, we reached a deal with them that they didn't support the Tibetan cause, but they just give us money in order that they get reports on what we had on Tibet and China. Again, and then I had to hit the typewriter. In those days, we used those machines. And Rinpoche negotiated all this. I spent years in Paris working with French intelligence and French sinologists. And then he would also, in some ways, protect my back, in the Tibetan political scene. So for many years, this is how, and we were very close. Essentially, I was not a politician, I'm more an intellectual. So all the advice on books and this and that took from me. And he protected me when I was working in Dharamsala. And I did need a lot of protection. I was very young, very arrogant, made a lot of enemies, but Rinpoche was very kind. He was always helpful. So we had many years together, and this and many other political activities. One of the biggest being after Mao Zedong died, the Tibetan Youth Congress that Rinpoche at that time was the president. We set out on a campaign that basically changed the whole Tibetan political situation in India. Until then, the government of India really paid very little attention to Tibet, especially after Mrs. Indira Gandhi came to power. The Dalai Lama was also treated very shabbily. But then the Tibetan Youth Congress, under Gyari Rinpoche's leadership, and with our effort, we came out in enormous demonstrations, and our efforts, in a way, were helped by fate. Now, if you just carry on, in spite of what the police are doing, if you keep on with your struggle, luck comes into play. In the middle of all the struggle, people being arrested, thrown in jail, Mrs. Gandhi lost the elections. And her government, for the first time in Indian history, the entire Indian government under the Congress collapsed. And a completely new set of Indians came in. And they were all our old friends from Rinpoche's parliamentary group for Tibet. M.C. Chagla, Jaya Prakash Narayan, all the old Gandhians, all Tibetan supporters. And Rinpoche knew them all. He and I, and then there was basically one old Tibetan monk, very fat. He was called the Friar Tuck of the Tibetan resistance. And we would just run around all over Delhi, sometimes trying to free the people in jail. But in the end, the government of India at that time assured the Tibetans that India would take up the Tibetan issue. It was a huge victory for us, for Rinpoche. It turned out, in the end, it soured because of Dharamsala politics. I don't need to go into this further. And so after that, Rinpoche and I also, we parted ways because I really had my issues with the Dharamsala government, and I was not interested in the negotiations with China and this and that. So we went our different ways. I kept up my opposition to this entire thing, and I still do. Even recently when I met His Holiness, I told him. And so, but Rinpoche was always with me and supporting me, even though I totally disagreed with him on many things. So I just want to conclude by saying it was not only him as a person, but his family, the Gyari, tremendous people. One of the most important families from Nyarong and in eastern Tibet, because Nyarong is one of the most important Tibetan principalities there. And Rinpoche's family, the Gyari, were not only important as chieftains, but people who had taken up arms against the Chinese. Rinpoche's surviving mother, I think his older mother passed away recently, but his younger mother, Dorji Yudin, personally, at a very young age, about 18 or 19, put on a man's chuba, tied a pistol around her waist. I'm not exaggerating. And she led all the young people of Nyarong to revolt against the Chinese, to rebel against them. You know, and this is violent. A lot of people were killed. Finally, all the Nyarongwas that you see here, their parents had to leave their country, fighting all the way. And so she's a big hero of mine. And I was very close to the family because of people like that. I admired them. For me, she was something out of Hemingway, like For Whom the Bell Tolls. Then there's Gyari Rinpoche's grandmother, Gyari Chimidoma, incredible warrior. She fought against the governor of Sichuan and the Gomindang many, many years. In the end, they captured her. She came out fighting from a burning castle with a sword. And the soldiers captured her. They took her down to Chengdu, put her before a firing squad, and they shot her. But before they shot her, she gave a little talk. She said, "People of Nyarong, don't forget me. I died because of your freedom." The person who told me the story when I was writing this down, I was very young, and as I told you, I was very cocky and arrogant. I said, "People don't talk like this except in stories." He got really mad at me. He said, "Write it down as I told you. It's true." And actually, it's not a story that I'm repeating here. You know, Prince Wangyal, the Tibetan collaborator, in the days when he was fighting against the Gomintang, he wrote a song about this woman, Chimidoma. It's in a Tibetan newspaper, old one from Kalimpong. So this is absolutely true, and the best witness we have for this is Chairman Mao himself. In his memoir written by Edgar Snow, it's called Red Star Over China. If you see somewhere on page 230 something, he mentions that when they did the Long March, she killed a lot of them. He said, "We have a debt to pay to this Tibetan queen." He called her Tibetan queen. She had taken her men, slaughtered the communist troops there. Very violent, not at all Buddhist. But for me, important because this is about our country, our identity. So Rinpoche came from a family of people who fought and died for their country, for their faith. And that's why you have a person who, as much as I disagreed with him in later years, is still respected and loved by many people. Thank you.
Next, we have Mary Macbeth Markey, sorry, former TCA president.
I've been sitting in the front, so I didn't realize how many people were here. I'm deeply honored. And I had to bring up this smiling picture of Rinpoche because, as you can tell, I'm also quite overwhelmed by everything that's been said so far. There have been so many beautiful words written and spoken about Lodi Gyari Rinpoche in newspapers, on important websites, and in long conversations among friends who so deeply feel his loss. Lodi has been described as a brilliant strategist, a monumental statesman, I quite like that, Carl, a patriot of historic contribution and impact. And in our hearts, I suspect, I know from today that many of us have more precious memories of Lodi that even today we would find difficult to share. Perhaps these memories will be the greater comfort as we carry them privately with us a little longer. Before I start, I have to ask Leslie Friedel Rich to stand up. Go ahead, Leslie. Leslie created a secure work base for Rinpoche, a work base she zealously guarded. Leslie, stop crying, dutiful, smart, and assertive, kept us all in line. She continues to be a support and touchstone for Lodi, for which we are deeply grateful. My own association with Lodi began 30 years ago, like Keith's, in circumstances not unusual on Capitol Hill. I was tasked to pitch hit and take a meeting on behalf of my boss, Senator Claiborne Pell, who was the new chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. He had been called to the Senate floor to defend some legislation on discussion of war powers. Senator Pell was intrigued by the spiritual history of Tibet, perhaps more than the political history. And he was also intrigued by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, whose emissaries I would be meeting. I was instructed to be supportive and to indicate every good wish of the senators. I remember almost nothing of that meeting itself, but it launched a chain of events that drew me close to Lodi Gyari and contributed to a formidable legislative legacy for Tibet in the United States Congress. It would also redirect my own life's course. Time spent with Lodi, Tenzin Tethongla, and other Tibetans, many of you here, turned me to your cause, which would eventually become my own. That meeting was also my first encounter with Lodi's genius. He was expert at building human relationships, at collecting people for Tibet. Once Rinpoche grabbed onto you and pulled you into the Tibet world, he never let go. I would like to think that I, and some of us others, have absorbed that lesson from Lodi as the first necessary step in professional and personal diplomacy. Make a genuine connection. Take care of it. Don't let it go. It has also been observed of Lodi that his greatest asset was his internal compass strength. I understand now, derived from a formidable family. Lodi's resolve was unbreakable. He yielded no ground. He certainly yielded no ground to me, reminding me on more than one occasion that you, Mary Beth, are not Tibetan and that Tibetans would decide. But he did take counsel from non-Tibetans and was open to the discussion of ideas and strategies, and even sought out other people's ideas. He gave them space, he exploited them, he used them like open doors to new possibilities. Lodi had a perceptive and open mind, but his thinking was firmly rooted in Tibetan values and tradition. Lodi was a conservative, born of a conservative time and culture. He respected and acknowledged authority. He did not play at great power politics. Rather, as Jamyang Norbu said, he knew what was at stake and what the Tibet issue could be in Washington, for New Delhi, in Beijing. Again and again around the world, Lodi made the case for the strategic importance of Tibet, until there developed a new consensus that the Tibet issue had not been settled in 1959. As an American citizen, Lodi's political inclinations veered Republican, much to the consternation of John and I and others. But he could count close friends of other political persuasions. More than anything, Lodi was an honorable man whose service to Tibet should have been above reproach, especially by his fellow Tibetans. Time and again, he deflected praise away from himself onto the collective effort, the greater significance, the essential cause, and always the vision and leadership of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Lodi was especially protective of the stature of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and he was insistent that those who represented His Holiness and His Holiness's interests be of high moral character and beyond reproach. He would be heart-sickened should that not be the case. Yes, Lodi was a great man in his intellectual attributes and lived values. It elevated all of us who had the privilege of his personal example and guidance. In spite of these high qualities, Lodi was accessible and warm. He liked to pose for pictures, as if that moment of contact was meaningful and solidified an enduring commitment. When walking back to work from the White House, Lodi liked to stop and have a piece of cake at Café Soleil a few blocks away. Whether his motivation was to review the key points of the meeting or to eat the cake, it's impossible to know. I clearly benefited from both. Lodi kept and protected the confidence of the great and the less great. He insisted on personal loyalty, and he returned it. He also forgave and defended missteps, including my own, more than once. Once when I had provided information on background to a Washington Post reporter about a conversation I'd had with an unnamed advisor to President Obama, Lodi took it upon himself to get the story buried so that I would be protected from any personal recriminations from the White House. Lodi was skillfully persuasive and a fantastic storyteller. The greatest treat was to sit with him late into the night and be drawn into the mystical mandala of his storytelling. Lodi could carry you to another place and time, leaving you astonished but convinced and always wanting to hear more. Lodi always left you wanting more time with him, and so it is now. His passing leaves an enormous void in this earthly space, and certainly in the Tibet world. But as Tashi Rabge La has so beautifully shared, Gyari Rinpoche also left us all an extraordinary gift. He gave us a glimpse into potential Tibetan greatness to come. As we say in my tradition, amen. And may angels lead you to paradise, my dear friend.
Next, we have Puchung Tsering, former CTA staff who has worked with Rinpoche in Dharamsala.
Rinpoche was my boss, my mentor, and a guide for over 30 years. So today, before I talk about Rinpoche working for him in his service to His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan government, I wanted to recognize quite a few people here whose presence here gives us an understanding of how Rinpoche was effective. We have here Mr. Greg Craig, who is the first special coordinator for Tibetan issues in the State Department. We also have Mr. Carl Gershman, who is the president of the National Endowment for Democracy. In fact, Rinpoche and Carl were collaborators in his initial years in the United States in working for Tibet. Then somewhere at the back is Bill Schuler. Many of you may not know him, but Bill worked with Rinpoche on the Conservancy for Tibetan Art and Culture, which was another aspect of Rinpoche's life that he really was working for, because he believed that the preservation and promotion of what we loosely call the Tibetan culture was as important as the immediate political struggle of the Tibetan people. Then John Eckel is here, who has worked for ICT for many years, worked with Rinpoche for many years, eventually becoming the president and currently the board member. Mr. Todd Stein, who was a colleague at ICT, but more importantly to the Tibetans here, he worked in the Special Coordinator's office in the State Department and is currently a staffer in the Congress. And Michel Bohana, I don't know whether I can call you a bodhisattva in many ways, but Michel worked with Rinpoche from the beginning in the conceptualization of the International Campaign for Tibet, and was among those Injis, if I may call you that, who really helped us and continues to do so in her own way. I wanted to speak two aspects about Rinpoche's life as a Tibetan civil servant. I had the fortune to begin working in Dharamsala in 1984 when Rinpoche was working there. And straightforward, I realized that he was a man of strategy. Normally, civil servants are of two kinds. One will do their 9-to-5 job, and then that is it, because then he or she does their work and does it well, and there's no issues, no problems that he or she needs to handle. He or she will not go out and face problems. That is called a very dutiful bureaucrat. But there's another side of bureaucrats where somebody will really go beyond his or her own confines, even if that is not to the, I don't want to say liking, but even if that doesn't suit the environment of the community or the civil servant nature. Rinpoche was the later. He really believed that if Tibetan, we are not in exile mainly for the sake of it. We are there for a struggle, and he believed that for us to be considering ourselves mainly as a 9-to-5 civil servant wasn't really right. He went beyond that and really encapsulated the spirit of strategy into the Tibetan governance, if you will. And through his perspective, he was able to shape the nature of the Tibetan political struggle since the 80s, and particularly so when he led the Tibetan dialogue team in the talks with the Chinese government. So if you really look at what has happened on the dialogue process, then certainly you'll come to appreciate that at a time when all the odds were against us, Rinpoche was able to keep the flame of dialogue alive and make it possible for us to do whatever we can for the future. The second aspect of his civil service life is something that I, as a junior officer working for him, and many of my colleagues over here who have worked with Rinpoche and the Ramsal can testify. That is that he, again, in the Tibetan environment where we believe in what is called the seniority or respect for the elders, and the Rinpoche would observe all those protocols, but at the same time he would also treat you as a person and not merely as somebody who is under you. He went out of his way to really, if he saw the potential, to really promote you and to help you contribute more to the Tibetan cause. In doing this, he was sincerely, dutifully, and meaningfully serving His Holiness the Dalai Lama. It's very important for us to understand this. I wanted to end by something that many of our Tibetans my Tibetan colleagues will get the significance. When Rinpoche was sick and undergoing treatment in San Francisco a month or so earlier, even more than that, the Capital Area Tibetan Association came out with a circular asking the members that it is time to contribute your annual voluntary contribution to Dharamsala. When I informed Rinpoche about this, he and his family immediately asked me to pay the contribution to the Capital Area Tibetan Association. He was a dutiful Tibetan who really dedicated himself and not kept himself high above, but became at the same time one of us. Thank you, Rinpoche.
Next, we have Elsie Walker, friend of Rinpoche and cousin of President Bush.
I have to read because I might cry if I don't read, but I know that Lodi wouldn't like this because I never saw him read from anything. He once said, "Oh, Elsie, don't read, just speak from your heart." But if I did, I'd be a blathering idiot. So I want to thank Dorji for asking me to say a few words about Lodi, and I want to convey my deep condolences to your brothers and sisters and to Dawa and to all the Gyaris. There must be hundreds of you by now. Joel McCleary was sorry not to be here, and so first I'd like to read an email he sent to Leslie, and she circulated it to some of us after Lodi died. So Joel says, "I will not be at the 49th day ceremony for Lodi. I will be in California on my way to Asia, including Bangkok, where over the years Lodi and I spent many hours by the river talking politics, Tibet, Mongolia, and his book. With each visit, our friendship deepened. I celebrate the fact that I saw Lodi in San Francisco right before his surgery. We found him strong, focused, and at peace with what lay ahead. My last image of him was of a proud and noble Kampa warrior prepared for battle and death. Lodi was a force. If he had been born in a country of his own, he would have been its leader. But having lost his country, he made us citizens in a larger cause than ourselves, our nationality, our tribes, or our worldly concerns. He was president of a global phenomenon which changed and will continue to change lives. Mao Zedong would never have understood that one day His Holiness the Dalai Lama and his great ally Lodi would ultimately have more positive and lasting impact on the world than the Little Red Book. Oh Mahahum, Joel. So now me, not quite as fervent there. So Lodi was both a politician and a holy man, and that is not an easy mixture. He was such a good politician, I often wondered what his life would have been like if he were only a Rinpoche. I don't think he would have lasted long in one role or the other. He could be tough, he could be shrewd, he was deeply loving, he was deeply human, he told great stories, he loved his family, he loved his country, and he loved his religion. The memories I have of Lodi I will treasure. They are big and they are very small. The smallest ones are the way his hand shook a little bit, The way the wedding ring was a little tight on his chubby finger. The way he announced himself on the phone. Hello, Elsie, Lodi here. And his love of Dawa's cooking and Thai food. We were late for a plane one time, and poor Lodi, I made him run through Dulles Airport. He sort of ran as I called back over my shoulder, come on, Rinpoche, faster, faster, Lodi, faster. The biggest memory, of course, is Lodi's galvanizing force behind the meeting between George H.W. Bush and the Dalai Lama on April 16, 1991. With Lodi's edits, I'd written the president several months in advance, laying out the reasons I thought he ought to meet the Dalai Lama. I heard nothing in return, which we took as a good sign, because if it had been a no, I would have heard right away. A group of us went to San Francisco in mid-April for the opening of the Wisdom and Compassion Show, the first major art show where paintings were correctly labeled Tibetan instead of Chinese. Henry Kissinger tried to have that show canceled. While we were there, I got a phone call from the Secret Service telling me not to get excited, but to provide the telephone number of the Dalai Lama's contact in Washington in case there was a meeting. We all left San Francisco not knowing whether there would be a meeting the next day in Washington or not. I was living outside of Philadelphia at the time. The phone rang at what felt like the middle of the night. Hello, Elsie, Lodi here. The White House just called. The meeting is on for tomorrow at 3. He sounded so happy. I'll never forget that voice. After that, Lodi and I were forever bonded. I was very touched to hear his voice the night before his operation. He called to share some thoughts and said he'd see me for Thai food in November. It did not feel like goodbye, and it barely feels like it now. The Dalai Lama has become the most popular man on the planet, in large part thanks to Lodi and many of you in this room. Now we have to help the new generation of Tibetan citizens and leaders find their voices and their footing. The message remains the same: save Tibet's unique spiritual culture. I know Lodi would want all of us to keep thinking big and to fight for what's right. Tibetan Buddhist culture is making great strides in China, thanks to Tibetans remaining faithful to their culture and to core groups across the plateau working hard to preserve it. They need help to keep going, so each of us must find ways to help them. This is the best way I can think to honor Lodi's memory and his life's work, to push against Chinese policies here and to provide help there. I feel the deepest gratitude to Lodi and to many of you in this room for our work together and for your friendship and for helping me to have a meaningful and fascinating life. Thank you so much.
Next we have Matteo McCasey, CTA President.
Thank you, Dorji, and thank you to the Narayan community for having me here. I certainly feel the least qualified to speak about Lodi's contribution. I probably known him the less in this room. I only met him in 2009. It was not even 10 years ago, and at the time I was a member of the Italian Parliament. I was trying to organize a conference, the World Parliamentary Conference on Tibet, on which Mary Beth and John had been working the years before. And I had an interest in Tibet, but I never had a chance to meet with him. I had traveled just few years before to Dharamsala. I met His Holiness, and that created the connection. But I want to say just a few things. But the official obituaries in the Washington Post and the New York Times have rightly described him as a diplomat because of his negotiations with the Chinese government. But to me, Lodi was really a politician. But he was a very high-level politician. I think he was the only, till now, really Tibetan official who understood how Western politics work. And he knew how to talk to Western politicians, how to adjust to their agenda, to their local or international issues on which they were focused, but at the same time, he was bringing the weight and the importance of Tibetan culture and identity, which is still today under threat. And he was able to provide what he always mentioned, this heart connection with the Tibetan issue, so that you give politicians and people who are in power something that is worth fighting for. Because politicians, in the end, the good politicians, they want to do that. And politics, he saw politics as a way to try to help people. And I know that in our movement, in the Tibetan movement, in Tibetan establishment, there are so many aspects. There is, the importance of Tibetan culture. There is the Dharma that has its own ways. And then there are the politicians. And I think what he was able to do is to bring everybody together in a strategic way. And not everybody needs to be a freedom fighter. Not everybody needs to be involved in the movement in the first row, but it's very, very important for all who care about the preservation of Tibetan culture and identity to get involved politically, because only through politics you can be able to provoke and promote change. And I think what he has done, not only at ICT, it has been mentioned before, is something that will last for a long time and on which we have to build on. Recently, I had the privilege to be with Bushung in Dehradun for the funeral rites, and we saw so many people in a very, very beautiful ceremony organized by the family there. And Dolma Gyari, that all know well, she told us that ICT, in a way, was the extended family of Lodi, and we feel very privileged for having that opportunity to be considered that, and we will continue to do our best also to inspire the younger generation of Tibetans to follow his legacy, to follow his leadership, and try to establish some way to reconnect politicians not only in Washington, D.C., but all over the world with the just cause of Tibet. Lodi, as I mentioned, it was probably one of the key people who has contributed to bring the knowledge of the importance of Tibetan identity and culture to the world. I think the least we can do, and ICT will continue to do that. And this week, you might have heard there was some good news in the US Congress with the approval of an important piece of legislation about which we had discussed also with Lodi. And I think the least we can do from our side is to return the favor of having been able to connect with the beauty and the depth of Tibetan teachings and Tibetan culture, and to help to bring some freedom back to Tibet. Thank you very much.
Sorry for saying CTA instead of ICT. I'm not going to make this mistake again. Now we have TYC, Tashi Lamsel, General Secretary.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tashi Lamsa, General Secretary of Central Tibetan Youth Congress based in Dharamshala, and I come from India. Gyari Rinpoche, as a founder, one of the founder of Tibetan Youth Congress, I think I would like to speak on Rinpoche's connection with the Tibetan Youth Congress. But I thought I was supposed to speak in Tibetan, so please allow me to speak in Tibetan. Tiring Rinpoche ki shibju shiku ki chumbu mulala ya chigyu nambe gyamne ginduma nambare koga ki ten nambare dagnashi gungu tunju da kalun tisu gungu tedun tinsin namjala dagnashi pumima chidu doji tsiden lagu ube an dagnashi de ICT ki tanda geji pudun lengu kanki zezu da leji namba pesha daganda tsangmalo ki tsin shumu goche anu gundu da mima dagnashi Gyari Rinpoche nami bunji nambare an dine dili ya kuti shunyi nyarong ki tsumi tsangmalo la ya puk shunu lenzo ki tsabshu je tsamdi shuya yin Zawe tatanda naba zu kense ri Gyari Rinpoche kin zeba tine kana shugu shuna shu ma zawe nedanji chagi yore yine tatanda kongla ya Gyari Rinpoche dan an mikse ki yunga yuwa da tunga yuwa naba zu ngone shibjin chawaji ma shu di shu mogo che ngarang tanda kapsu pabe puk shunu lenzo ki lengin kude ki yuwa sonzang Gyari Rinpoche ki puk shunu lenzo da chawa yuwa nedang tone tezi shunu sangpa chawaji tenzo naba zu kense ri Gyari Rinpoche ki ngone takanda nganzo 미도 저거 지금 바게 개와 두고 요와 손자당 가자고 준비이나 전주 나로게다 미도 저거 차샤네 미도 숨바 저거 차두고 요래 안간주 치게 미 삼로 단단다 만자베 토네 안간주 베베 삼로 단다 지게 토네 미도 gem바 솔야 남샤 균두네 수수 심디네 굳이 첨부 슈고 유비네 간다 지게 굳이 슈제 밑에다 냠두 낭자체네 까무 슈야다 딘제게 삼로디 레투고요 마르 디손자 가두이네레 아니 심마도다 바자제 컨디 슈마누고 딘제게 토네 제르 무친게 니리니리게 초와제단다 공바시단다를 십징타와 딘제게 킹싱기메 이네다 간다 표나로를 유두네레 전주나로를 르베지네 착바나로네레 닌티나로네레 상규카네레 택비나로네레 간다 제르 무친게 제버틴레드조 가두이네 로데니시다 아니 통데니 제데니 딘제지니 디 이메일 모두 왔다 던진게 조조디 지게 여러 무치 근원에다 슈닐hen조다 저거 유베톤이 쉬야디 차디게 디 쉬야디 단나바주 켄세디 직동급제 둔주탄베 다와 주베 나라야 다 간다 부 슈닐hen조 디주디 통마산주나니 아니 단다 여러 무치라레 안 단다 데 지규나베 고 데돈디지남게라레 데돈디지 게지라레 다나시 칼누티수 당바 소나도게라 코나즈 시기 조 투긴시제 통마 아니 촌두고야체 디네 마주남바 차디게 요레 디손데 잠바다 텐디 갑투두 슌렌조 디죽디 통마 주야게 공찰레 야레 공찰렘 베딜 야마 차시 딩나 야레 디네 우스 레둥 고잠야가 돌려야 텐디 코나즈 굴레망부 시우지 교요레 딩기도 다 간다 가리 이메일 모두 바 슌렌조 디죽디 쭉베 젤야 보여게 템바 찹시레 야 보여 미만다 게가로 야 펜도 가주 중유미디 남바솔레지 슌나 텐소 다 슌렌조 디죽디 직동급제 둔주 탐베 다와 주베 시 듄인가 우수 고죽제 디네 단다보도 다 롱 십주 십게 딱다 주요레 십주 십게게 링레야 간다 겨울에 묻힌다 우품이 디죽 공도 표베 돈에 벽에 짜둔 탑주고 돌려야 슌렌조 디죽 딜 하가지 텐디 중요 마레스타 데베 전주나라 레베 지네 중요 마레스 슈투바지다 슈초바지 마오바이네 페지 딘데지 용투고 마레스 베네다 딘데지 차데요레 슌렌조 디죽 공원에 다 찹지기 돈에레 남바주 킹기 요레 다나시 게이 리중 송교고 돈에레 다나시 지조 셰슈 돈에레 신유 롭스 돈에레 항상하게 찰레 잡던 좀 망본나 요레 되게 차장지 간다 난투비야 되게 통마 저리를 무지 우베 코나조 시게 슌렌조 룩지도 통마 조야게 공바 코로바 공바 코베 제는 우스 락렌 떨어바 딘젤레 딘지 중요래 다 디죽 디 규제 나란주 전주 지조 나로려야 나란주 미마 치주 망보기 벽에 자든 링구돌려야 냠슈치하고 과가브라요레 슌기 똥좀 망볼려야 벽 자든 탑주고 돌려야 레가치야 긴구야 냠슈치야 소수그 누도 계승치야 딘제고 과가브제 라요레 믹세게 나란주 전주 지조 나로려야 다 간다 슌렌조 디죽 디 나로네 쭉버 거딘의 땡제 전주 지조 나로려야 부두 중와 랍징 우디 자장망보 소경 지도부 중요래 다 단다 디네야 베준저고 징이지 주비는 알아주데 페덴교게 공 데돈딘진 남게라 공오마 우베다 디네바 차 예를 슈된교 차장직 다 우슈누기 유네스르바 차데기도 공로산지몰라도 단다 좀바보 자연노블라레 다가나시 공공갈라 요레 아니 공추dim라도 다가나시 부준치릴라데 남게 샤스틸라레 베준저고 주비나 안 단데기 장어리 지두 도지티된라 오마 바로다산이 슈누 소존나 뇽바레 딘데기 토네 간다 전주기 다 단데 시경네 야우베 공마게 깔누티바다 공마 공매 깔누티바 라속바 망부지 다 간다 슈누틱주 디나로네 기싱제제 템바디게 차장지 간다 겨르르 뭐지다 고난족인 제바틴라라 땡제 중오지 차대기를 디손자 당에 디린데 망부 슈모고 제 만조 데리야 부구 슈누렌족이 찹제제 간다 겨르르 뭐친게 부구 슈누렌족이 딕주디 쭈벌레 땡제레 다가나시 궁오마게 다 간다 미지 시보 벼다 부미 덴드 다나시 보여단 비미기 내둥기 치도 굴레 겸박이 제제려야 제수 템베 토네 간다 슈눌렌족이 우윤레레 다나시 잠블링라 여베 보고 슈눌렌족이 산에 연라 개주 겹든다 총미 숨지 개동기 찹슈제 안게르르 무치려야 거디 닝자 슈야당 안 콩기 당 안종원의 신배 슈투비아 개요 말에 단대 안주 미랍사바기 슌기 디조당 단대 미랍사베 슈누 딩원에 토마 슈눌렌족 기산중 나야기 르부지 코나조 공바짱바 나시 미유짱바 디가나 양 아주 무투니 마옴바 공바규제 아니 로자 템부톤데 두고 인신에 드린 겨르르부징기 샤십주 충분만람들 쉬야이 도지체
Thank you. I would like to invite Dorje Satendra, Member of Parliament and Executive Director for Student for Free Tibet.
I've been asked to say a few words. firstly, thank you for the invitation. As a sitting member of Parliament of Tibetan Government in Exile, I want to pay my deeply condolence and respect to the family member in this difficult time. As we heard the legacy of Gyari Rinpoche from all the people who had worked with him all this year, I can surely say that Gyari Rinpoche will be remembered as a true hero and patriot of Tibet. I can feel that today Rinpoche is not physically with us, but he will be remain with us in our spirit, in our hope, in our fight for freedom and justice. And I think it is truly important for the Tibetan new generation. And I think it is a lifelong dedication that Rinpoche had invested and worked and built this new leadership platform like Tibetan Youth Congress, which has given opportunity for so many of us to work for the movement. And I can assure you that, as Rinpoche said, Tibetan spirit would not die. We will continue the legacy of Rinpoche, and Tibet will be free in the future time, and we will always be working together. I take this opportunity for all our supporters for being here with us. I think more than ever before now, we need your support. It is a difficult time, but we will never give up. And I again want to thank everyone for joining here today with the family. Thank you, everyone.
I would like to invite Kungo Ngudupsring, the representative of CTA North America, to share a few words.
Good afternoon. Actually, as you see that I'm not in the official memorial speaker, but I'm so indebted for this opportunity to say a few words. It has been my ardent wish, actually, since the passing away of Rinpoche, that it so happened that when Rinpoche passed away here in San Francisco, I was in Dharamsala with with a group of CEOs and directors of a museum involved with the summit with His Holiness. And on the second day of the meeting, then we heard about the sad passing away of Rinpoche. And it was so heavy for me personally. I'll tell you why. And then we had actually planned an evening program performance with the Tibetan Institute of Performing Arts with a cultural performance, which we said we canceled that in honor of Rinpoche's passing away. And then today, when I heard about the memorial, yesterday I had to go to New York because we had a Chinese reception conference funded by Carl Grosham, the NED, and it was very successful. So this morning I said, I have to be here to attend the event. So I was a little late for that, which I really apologize. But I'm so happy to see a lot of friends here, and I'd like to thank Rinpoche once again for making Tibetans so proud of today, as I was hearing the distinguished American speakers here talking about a Tibetan person's greatness, his contribution. And then also you have seen the Senate resolutions and statement by Leader Pelosi. So these are actually the testimony to tell us that there is a Tibetan who has been well respected everywhere. So personally, I know I have been in contact with Rinpoche, had the opportunity to work with him in the Tibetan Parliament way back in 1979 to 82. That was the 7th Tibetan Parliament that Rinpoche was our chairman. And I was just fresh out of college, and he is the one that I always look up to. And his skill in bringing the regional differences to table. And that was those days when we have a lot of regional issues, politics, internal, but Rinpoche so skillfully mediate and bring all the people together. And sometimes we also have great issues with the executive branch, and he so skillfully, he has that special art, as some of you were actually explaining at a higher level, but at the Tibetan parliament level also, those were the days. And one time I even asked Rinpoche, I said, how are you doing that? And Rinpoche told me that you will come to know of this, you will know this when you become a chairman, which I never became. And that was actually one term of the Tibetan parliament that I have served. And then I moved to administration. So he was a great person with that kind of skill and art of bringing very discordant people together, convince them through. So, and then later on, I was in administration. Rinpoche has such an expertise and interest in the international area, as someone really said that truly. And then when Rinpoche was appointed here as a special envoy, then I thought to myself, I never spoke to anybody, but I thought that this is a very befitting sort of kind of job for him. He can really bring people of a lot of differences together. So, as I think I heard Carl Gershom was saying one time, that although he was not able to bring a sort of negotiation or together with the Chinese, so Chinese are always like that. It's so hard to do that, but he has for 10 long years worked with them. That shows also to some extent his skill that way in bringing these things. So finally, I also wanted to pay my personal condolences to his family, that many of them, Kasur Gyari la, Doje Thome la, and Javyang la, and then Putung la. I know them personally for some reason. So I haven't got an opportunity to express my condolence to them, but then I really want to take this opportunity to really tell him how much we miss him. And when I was appointed a year ago as a representative of His Holiness, then I read about the Tibet Policy Act 2002. And that actually told me a lot about Rinpoche. And it's so hard normally to bring such an act into fruition. And then many of you have actually helped Rinpoche to get that act into place. And that was actually the monumental in the work of Rinpoche here in the US Congress and in the United States. So with these words, well, Rinpoche, I want you to say this and enter with His Holiness, said, no matter how long you live, but what matters is how you lived it. So Rinpoche, I think your passing away was a great miss, great loss for Tibetan struggle, Tibetan affairs, Tibetan issues, to all Tibetan people, but you have lived it fully, and we will always honor you, we'll always remember your legacy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now we have a brother of Rinpoche, Dorje Thokme Gyari, speaking on behalf of family.
Okay, first of all, I would like to thank His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who had given a special audience to my family within this 49th day of prayer. And then my parents, because of them, like my brother became so successful because they nurtured him in the way that he had been. And then, of course, there are his mentors, Gyalo, Lachung Kusho, Gyari, 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 Gyari called Amal Hachungkujo, let Mrs. Gyaltsen. Then there is Kasur Samutsirinda. And then his roommate, Kungo Tendung, because the way they helped him, and then I think they had lots of impact on the success that he had achieved. And yes, then Kungo Tendung, when I planned this prayer meeting, then I thought I should ask the help of Kungo Tendung, Kasur Tendung, because he knows my brother and he had been a part of the family. My parents and all know him. So I sought his help to organize this day's prayer. And then, of course, Kungo Tendung and Jamin Nubula, and beside them, there were two whom I wish they were here, Tisu Tobgela, and then Kungo Losongonchula. So, and then, of course, it clearly proves how much life he had touched, and I think every one of you who were in touch with him, you had a karmic relation. Because of that, you were able to help each other and make him smoothly sail through the job that he was to perform. That's why I want to thank every one of you who was connected with him. Thank you very much. And then, of course, Kungo Tendung, thank you for the presence. It's a lot for us. And also I want to thank those representatives from New York who had come all the way for this ceremony or prayer. We have New York and New Jersey Tibetan communities representative, Tunduk Seten, Regional Tibetan Youth Congress, and SFT representative, Dorje Thenela, Ngawa Tharshin, and also representative of Chuji Gonduk. And then, yes, we have from Boston, Jamet Tenzila. Jamet Tenzila's father was a very good friend of my father, and then also Jamet Tenzila became a supporter and confidant of Gyari Rinpoche too. So he is here, and I'm thankful that he could make his presence. Yes, Jahan Nubula is very important because we have spent many days together. And I recall one incident. What happened was, I believe it was a Saturday or Sunday. So Jahan Nubula went to meet someone, and he came back. And he looked worried. Why that happened was because the Communist Party of Tibet, they have sent a press release claiming to be the first political party. Of course, Jahan Nubula knew very well that in the long run, we'll have to accept any political party. But then, for him, it was too difficult to see that a communist party within our community claiming to be the first one. So then, Janavula and Rinpoche were discussing about it. And then during that time, like my brother-in-law Samu was there. My brother Chile was there. So what they decided is, okay, we have to call a press conference. We have to form a party, a political party. So Jan Nuvu became the first president and ever of Tibetan Democratic Movement Party. And Zamu was the secretary and Rinpoche was the PRO. So, and I think still maybe the membership is still open because he had never declared that he is closed. So that's why, like, for me, it is, for me, it was so important that Jayan Nubula come for this gathering. Thank you very much, Jayan Nubula. And then, like you see those serving tea and everything, they are mostly from DC area Tibetans. Gyari Rinpoche's friends like his Shastri, Pujungna and their families. But I don't want to thank them because of the simple reason that DC area Tibetans were a part of my brother's family. So how can I thank another member? So that's why I don't want to thank them. I appreciate. Thank you very much.
Would like to thank everybody who have come over here, including those who have shared their experience about Rinpoche at this, and now would like to move to the next program where it's offering of kata to the portrait of Rinpoche, led by the clergy and then representative of His Holiness and others. Thereafter, there's a simple lunch on the other side. Please join us there.